Welcome to another edition of Courageous Conversations Live. I'm your host, Pierre Quinn, and I am looking forward to today's conversation. Here on Courageous Conversations Live, we leverage the stories of leaders, of creatives, of entrepreneurs to help you live and lead with greater courage. And joining me for this episode, for this segment, is my good friend, Greg Fontus. Greg, thanks for being my guest today.
Sure thing, Pierre. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Man, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that we were able to have this discussion on a very, very important, trending, popular topic, however we want to categorize it, but looking forward to the much needed clarity that you're going to bring to our conversation today. So if you're just stopping the scroll, we want to invite you to hop in the comment section, check in with us. Our topic for today is DEI work that works. That's DEI work that works. If you got any questions for Greg or comments, throw those in the comment section. And we just want to check in and shout out you as well. We love all the people who hang out with us on Courageous Conversations and those who check out the replay too. So hop in that comment section and let us know that you're hanging out with us. All right, Greg, as we start this conversation, give me the Cliff Notes version, man. The 30-second, the commercial, the snapshot about who you are and the work that you do.
All right, cool thing. 30 seconds. Here we go. So I am Greg Fontus. I am based here in Nashville, Tennessee. I am a DEI consultant and trainer. I have my own company entitled The Fontus Experience, where I seek to empower leaders, teams to be inclusively excellent. How do we do this work of DEI? So I do it from a strategy lens, from doing assessments, organizational assessments, to DEI trainings, as well as strategy development, helping organizations build out what a DEI strategy looks like for the next, 3 to 5 years. So that's a brief snapshot of what I do, who I am. Love doing this work. I've been doing this for over 10 years now, diversity and inclusion work. And I don't see myself stopping anytime soon.
We got Elijah checking in with us. Shout out to you, sir. He says he's tuning in. And another one of our regulars on Courageous Conversations Live, Greg Mitchell, who says he can't wait to hear this discussion. So, Greg, fast forward, or actually go back in time. Give us the backstory of how you discovered, fell into, were recruited, found yourself in the direction of doing work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space.
Sure thing. I think for me, it has always been something that I've had a lens in seeing life through. Okay, so for me, I grew up, born and raised in Miami, Florida. You know that, Pierre. And growing up in Miami, if you've ever been there, you know that's a space of culture. It's a space where, culture is appreciated, foods are appreciation. We celebrate festivals. There's different types of people from all walks of life that exist there. And so for me, that was an initial lens in which I was introduced into life in, being able to be in a space that appreciated that appreciated difference, appreciated culture and difference. So that was part of the framing of my adolescent years. But in addition to that, I also am a member of the Haitian American community. And so I was the only person in my immediate family to be born in the States. And so I got to witness family members, immediate as well as extended family members, go for citizenship into this country, right? And so have to go through some of those challenges that existed. Excuse me. And for me, that framed me under the auspices of equity, right? Of how do we work towards being equity? How do we work towards being equitable? How do we work towards getting the same amount of rights as other people do have in this country? So those two ideas of appreciation of different cultures as well as equity shaped my framing, shaped my adolescent years. And so I always moved forward with those mindsets. And so I went through my college formative years with those mindsets of organizations I was involved in, started off my career in higher education. And while I was in higher education, I really got more of a professional start within diversity and inclusion by becoming a diversity and inclusion trainer. And so I went to various different conferences and institutes, became certified to do the work of diversity and inclusion, started doing it all across my university campus at that time. And then began to lead the diversity and inclusion efforts within a new space that was created a number of years later. And so from leading that space, I began to really learn the strategy development of DEI, learning how to advocate on a larger, institutional scale, started really understanding what it meant to do trainings on a large scale venue for large scale amounts of people, as well as in different pockets and different audiences. Began to really learn how to advise and work towards the development of underrepresented populations on a campus, and really started doing that a lot. Simultaneous to that, I began my own company. Actually, a couple of years ago, I actually started my consulting firm, and then really started to take off within the last year of really just doing this work and helping organizations. And so for me, it's always been a passion of mine, right? But we started off as a training vehicle for me, but then it then transitioned into full-on consulting and helping organizations and teams do this work well.
So I got to ask you, Greg, if you have any questions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion that you want to throw Greg's way, feel free to throw that in the comment section, and we'll take as many of those as we possibly can. I got to ask you, Greg, if I'm a part of a marginalized community, a marginalized population, does just having that designation or even that experience, being from a marginalized, from a limited something, happen, some group that's fighting for an equitable practice, does that automatically qualify me in my workplace to lead DEI efforts?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think that is a false perception that many have, in particular to those of majority identities, right? I've seen organizations, what their common narrative or thing to do is, hey, we need to start focusing on diversity efforts. Let's tap the people of color, or let's tap the minorities in our organization to do this work. We don't give them extra pay. We don't give them different titles. We just now put more work on them, because what it does is it now, because we have people of color, because we have underrepresented people that are a part of our organization, it's their responsibility to do this work, right? Because they may have vocalized it at one point, they may have a passion for it, whatever the case may be. But I think that's a false narrative on a couple of different realms, because one, when organizations do that and they tap the underrepresented person, the minority, to do the work, what it says is that this organization is absolving itself from the responsibility to have to do anything related to DEI, and they're tapping the person of color, as opposed to saying, how can we corporately, collectively do this work well and put in the appropriate amount of resources to do this work? So I think that's one reason as to why that's not okay to do that. The second reason that I'll suggest and offer in this space is that just because you're a person of who identifies as part of a minority population, underrepresented group, it doesn't mean you're qualified to do this work in a professional realm, right? It does mean you are qualified to advocate for yourself and for your community, I would argue, and say, yeah, sure, that's no problem. But as far as doing this work, it doesn't qualify you, because DEI is bigger than just an isolated identity. Okay. It's bigger than that. Right. So for example, for me, I'm Black Lives Matter all day. I will lift up the Black community. I will support the Black community. I will do whatever I can to make sure that the Black community's voice is heard as an individual. As a DEI practitioner, I have to consider, okay, there is this element of the Black community that I'm going to push for, and I'll argue that is, one of the centralized roots of the issues that we have pertaining to, oppression and systemic oppression and white supremacist systems and all those things. I would argue and say, sure, yeah. However, I must consider our women population, or the different genders. I must consider different sexualities. I must consider ability. I must consider the intersections of those different religions. I have to consider the full gamut of that, because if I don't consider that, then now I'm just promoting one agenda, and what I'm doing is promoting one at the exclusion of another, which is antithetical to the idea of diversity and inclusion. Right. So I can't necessarily, I don't think it qualifies you. I think it gives you a particular framing and lens as
Okay.
being a part of an underrepresented group. I don't necessarily agree that it does prepare you to be able to do this work on a holistic level, to do this work well and appropriately.
So Greg, what if I consider myself to be a great facilitator or a great speaker, and there's the opportunity out there because companies are literally, you can make the argument that some companies are literally throwing money in the
Mhm,
direction of, some of
mhm,
them want to absolve themselves from the responsibility. Some of them just want to say, check off a box and say we did something. And some of them are seriously interested about doing the work. And there seems to be more than a handful of opportunities out there. If I'm an
mhm.
organization and I want to start the conversation, start the process, bring someone in, work with a consultant or such as yourself, what are some of the things that I need to be mindful of? Because as you said before we started, there are some people out there doing more harm than good in the name of DEI.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a couple of things need to take place, right? If you're looking for a DEI consultant, right, I would look for someone who understands that DEI is not trendy,
Hmm.
right? It's not something that's for the moment.
Mhm.
Okay. Granted, I understand it. I understand that since George Floyd, since about 1 year ago, DEI is a very hot topic,
Yeah.
right? And I understand that, right? I understand the moment, right? But please remember that George Floyd was not the first African American to be gunned down, right? The issues that we're facing this past year are not the first time that they've been happening, right? And so I think it's important that if you're looking for a consultant, looking for someone who understands that this work is a process, right? And it's a work that's going to take years to do, right? And I think we have to get to that point where we start to say, hey, if I'm looking for someone, I'm looking for someone who can think beyond just this moment. Because as an organization, if I look for someone who's going to do stuff to implement, a strategy that is only going to be for this past year, this moment,
Hmm.
what happens when the moment passes?
Yeah.
What that means is that the strategy that you implemented is outdated, right? And so you need to be looking for someone who understands that DEI is bigger than the moment. That
Mhm.
DEI is something where I'm looking for someone who's really trying to institute a change over a period of time, right? You think about, let me use this illustration, right, of when we're in college, right? The ideal time for individuals to go through college is 4 to 6 years. That's, their undergraduate institution, right?
Mhm.
You coming in your first year, right? You finish your freshman year of college. That doesn't mean you're prepared for the workforce. That doesn't mean you're prepared to graduate. It takes you 4 to 6 years for there to be a transition in your mind, for there, by the time you leave, there is a cultural shift that has happened,
Yeah.
right? So the same thing is required for DEI work. I'm looking for someone to come in. Organizations should be looking for someone to come in and say, how can you help shift my culture in a matter of years, that to where DEI becomes sustainable and it becomes a part of the fabric of the organization, not just a jacket that you can put on and off. No, it becomes a part of the fabric of that organization. So if you're an organization looking for a consultant, DEI consultant, look for someone who has a track record or a mindset of implementing sustainable practices. Look for someone who understands that DEI is bigger than just one particular identity, albeit there are certain ones that may be in the moment, right? Yeah, sure. Black lives is a major thing in our nation. Understood. But we also recognize that our Asian American community has recently been going under some heightened scrutiny as a consequence of this COVID 19 that we're been experiencing here in North America, right? Here in the US in particular, right? We also understand that, this is Women's History Month, right? March, right? And so how are we relevant to the moment, right?
Yeah.
So looking for someone who is relevant to the moment, who doesn't exclude other identities and particularities, as well as understanding that there is a sustainable asset, a longevity component to doing this work of DEI.
I think that brings us to Greg's question. It fits perfectly here. Companies seem to be pushing for creating or building out DEI teams. Do you think this will have a true impact on DEI progress in the market, or are there other challenges besides having bodies in positions with the DEI titles? I think you spoke
Mhm.
a little bit, but if you could underscore it for us and bring us a bit more clarity to what Greg is asking. Great question, Greg.
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, I love that question. I think that there's a couple of components embedded within that, right? I think on one end, I believe companies should be pushing and building out DEI teams, right? I think there's some symbolic it's symbolic in one nature, right? In the sense that we're putting resources behind an entire unit to do this work well, right? So I think there's that shows company commitment to that organization. I think that building out teams is enables a company to say, hey, we have practitioners and professionals who we've invested into that's going to do this work well for our company, right? So I think on one end, I think it's great that we're doing that, and I think it will impact positively the market. However, I want to caution us, right?
Mm.
Implementing and establishing DEI teams and that be the only thing you do will not impact the culture in totality.
Mm.
Right? If we're not empowering those teams with the resources and the political capital within an organization, if we're not empowering them with that, it's going to be hard for those teams to be sustainable, because what we also are seeing in as a trend of what's happening through data and numbers, we're seeing a lot of individuals are going into these DEI roles and their shell life is about 3 years. Right,
Wow.
they're going to come in and they're going to leave simply because they did not feel empowered, simply because their voice is not being heard, and what's happening is that the company is being performative, right? So there's a lot of people, and 3 years is me being gracious. It's probably more so around 2 to 1 per organization, right? You know, individuals in these roles are not willing to deal with some of the challenges that organizations are presenting them, right? So I
Yeah.
think what needs to happen is, yes, we implement DEI teams, resources, we enable them with the political and social capital needed within the organization, but we also have the mindset that DEI is not just based on position, but is based on the word I'm looking for is, it's not about position, it's about practice, right? DEI should never only be relegated to the team, right? If it's a part of the fabric of the organization, we need to recognize that, sure, we have DEI positions and champions, but DEI is the work of everyone. DEI is something that should be infused throughout the entire organization.
Right.
Sure, Greg and Pierre may be DEI leads for this company, but our responsibility should not be we're the only ones doing this work. Our responsibility needs to be going to different leaders in different units, management levels, executives, etc., asking them, how are you championing DEI in your respective unit, right? Whether it's our HR business partners that we're getting connected with, whether it's our people operations, whomever those individuals are, we need to be asking those questions. How is DEI embedded throughout your organization? Is it only just a position, or is it a position and a practice? Right. So I think, once we get to that point where DEI is a practice and those teams are getting those resources and getting those political social capital within the organization, that's when it have more of a positive impact. It will hurt the market if we're not doing all of those things.
Now, there are some spaces where we're having the conversations easily. Leadership teams are bringing them up. They're responding to what's happening in the major news media, not just in the immediate past, but things that have been happening for years, and the hard work and celebrations and milestones that are brought back to us annually. But there are some companies, Greg, some organizations that it's more difficult, almost not almost, just even flat out ignoring or not paying attention to what's going on. So Elijah asks, Greg, how do you get an organization to be open to the fact that the work is needed and not just shun it off as we don't have a budget or we can do this from within?
Great question. Great question. I think that And I think it's sad that we still have to do this in this day and age,
Yeah.
right? And that's the business case for diversity,
Hmm.
right? Because there's already studies and literature that go back years and potentially even decades that already suggest that DEI impacts your bottom line in a positive way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, in corporations, money's talks, right?
Yeah.
If I can come to you, if I have to sit here and argue you and say, listen, your organization can make more money when there's more diversity
Mhm.
within your staffing, as well as your vendors and your external stakeholders.
Mhm.
You can make more money when employees are happier and more engaged. Like, you can make more money when you invert the pay structure and say, listen, I'm going to maybe decrease slightly executive pay and increase lower level staff pay. Like, there will be increasements in employee engagement that all will impact your bottom line, right? Like, the fact that I have to argue and suggest that's beyond me, right? So I'll say that. But getting an organization to be open to the fact that the work is needed, right? Man, you have to understand there's a political climate that one has to navigate,
Mm.
right? And so, who within the organization are DEI advocates and champions in their own respective ways, right? Being able to get those individuals on board, right? Getting an executive sponsor, right? Someone who is in the ear of those executives with some political power. I think that's helpful, right? Because now you have someone championing this cause in a room that you may not even be able to be a part of. Okay. And I think you get those individuals, you get the individuals, the constituents all across the company to begin to speak up, right? And we begin to move this as a priority, right? We begin to champion, and we begin to say, hey, listen, it may take a while for us to get there, but we need to get to that point where we're moving and saying, hey, let's go ahead and deal with this. Let's go away and deal with the fact that we need to put some money towards this. And I think that once we've pushed it to that point, if the organization still does not move, then I think where the heart of that organization is. I think that the organization is not willing to do anything about it. And if you're someone that is passionate about DEI, passionate about belonging and still feeling included in this space, if that organization doesn't want to do anything, about it, then that may not be the place for you. Right. And that maybe not be a place for me, Greg Fontus. That may not be a place that I want to consult and work with. I simply don't, because at the end of the day, what makes organizations relevant to diversity is having a consciousness that this is something that is occurring, right? That the people that work within this organization are not just talent, but they're talent plus people with interests, with various things that impact their workspace.
Yeah. Marcus points out something that you said earlier in this space, being someone who can think beyond the moment. And as you also pointed out, Dr. Deborah Higdon, but you also have to be relevant for the moment. And you underscored that clearly for us. Greg, I want to ask you before we run out of time in our conversation today, man, so rich, so rich, and appreciate all the comments and questions that have come in. And even if you're watching the replay of this, feel free to drop your question in. We'll make sure Greg gets that question and an opportunity to respond to it. I want to ask you, Greg, you've been doing this work over a decade now. Can you think back to an experience, a training, a consultation you had with an organization, and of course, change the name and location to protect the innocent, but an experience that you had in your role, in your responsibilities as a consultant, a coach, a trainer, and facilitator, that you walked away from that experience saying, yes, this is why I do this work. This right here is why I do this work.
Yeah, I would say this actually happened earlier in my career. I would probably say I'd been a trainer about maybe a year and a half, 2 years, right? And I remember I was training a large body of people. This had to have been probably about, I would say, 150, 150, 160 participants who were part of this training session I was doing. And I don't necessarily recall the subject that I was communicating it. But what I do recall was that me training this body of individuals really was the first engagement they really had with DEI work. Mm-hmm. And I recall, while in the midst of this session, this was a 3-day session that I did back to back to back, and I'm going through these trainings with them. And I remember I got to the point where an individual stood up and started sharing how this was like the first time that their identities were validated in a public space. And this was the first time that they had an opportunity to feel heard. And I remember just sitting back, listening to this person share this. This individual broke down into tears. Other people broke down into tears. And these are people of minority identities are beginning to just feel that as though they felt like they mattered in a moment. This is before the wave of Black Lives Matter. This is before all of that stuff, right? Yeah. This is an individual started to feel like, I feel validated and I feel heard. And from that had a lasting impact on that organization for a long time, right? And I walked away from that moment realizing that the work of DEI is not about me. It's not about me. This is truly a service for others, right? It is truly a responsibility and a commitment that you have to other people to tell them, no matter what the system says, hey, you matter and you belong in this particular space. No matter where, actually not in this particular space, wherever you're at, you matter and you belong. If no one else tells you that, I'm telling you that. So for me, I walked away from that moment recognizing that this is bigger than me. Yeah. This is going to go beyond me. That when I leave this space, they're still going to have to deal with this. And I trusted and hope that what I left them with are tools that will help them navigate that to where they can always have that feeling of I matter and I belong. So that was huge for me, that moment. And I still, reflect on that moment to this day because it encourages me. It inspires me when I'm tired, when I hear on the news and I see all these articles come across of just all of these horrible things and the grind of this work gets tough and it gets difficult. I have to sit back and say, it's bigger than me. Right. It's beyond me. It's for other people. Right. I've been gifted and blessed with the ability to navigate spaces, even if I don't feel like I matter or I belong as a Black man in this country. Yeah. I have my outlets. Right. Other people don't. And so for me, if I can champion the gifts, the education, the skill sets that I have for other people, I will.
I think that's so important. So good. Thanks for not just your transparency on it, but the positioning of realizing, because for a lot of us who do training and development work, regardless of the particular topic, but even more specifically for DEI work, sometimes we make it about us. And when we do that, we lose the opportunity to be a catalyst for transformation with the organizations that we're working with. As you said earlier, and Chris echoes, it's not just about position, it's about practice. And what practices are we helping people to have once we left? So it's important. If you're going to do it right. Greg says, don't just put false resources into something because of a trend or how others may view the organization. Greg, you've been doing this for a while. You're very good at it. The reviews speak to it. The transformation organizations have experienced as a result of working with you speaks to that. If I'm watching this live or replay, what would make me want to click on your LinkedIn profile or even go to gregfontus.com to reach out to you? Why should I make that decision, and who are you looking to connect with?
I'm looking to connect. Well, why? Right. I think those who really want that, really want to do this work right. Right. If there is a commitment beyond the performative idea, the politics of DEI, if this is something that you are committed to and you want a partner in this work, I'm the person to reach out to. Right. Because I don't look to come in and say, hey, this is exactly what's going to work. every organization, every person is different, right? I think that's the nature of DEI. Everyone is different.
Yeah.
So for me, I look to partner with people to do this work well, right? And the reason why I use the word partner is because I don't want to come in and do the work all for you. I want to empower you to do it. Right. I want to be able to leave and you say, I have the tools to navigate critical dialogues. I have a strategy in place. So now let's hold ourselves accountable to that. I understand the nature of my organization. Right. And so I can now work on things that we need to work on. So, if you're looking for someone to partner with you in this work, if you're looking for someone who will challenge you to be culturally relevant and responsible, if you want someone to challenge you to for your organization to operate in the ideas of inclusive excellence, then reach out to me. Let's connect.
So good, Greg. So good with what you shared. I appreciate you taking the time. And I want to thank you in advance. I've been thanking all of my guests recently in advance for the individuals that are going to reach out to you, the ones that will go to gregfontus.com, the ones that will click on your LinkedIn profile, will send you a connection request, and we'll begin to have the conversation about doing DEI work that actually works. So I want to thank you, Greg, for hanging out with us on Courageous Conversations Live. And thank you so much for the work that you continue to do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me, Pierre. I enjoyed it.
We'll talk soon. And listen, Greg, before I let you go, I want to send out a reminder, folks. Greg is here. He's a resource. He's available, and he can empower you to do the work well. So don't just take this and walk away from it. Some of you need to tag your leadership team on this conversation as a catalyst to begin having a discussion of your own. All right, Greg, until next time.
All right. See you.